Hey, happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Improving's Lunch and Learn series. Today's a great conversation. We're going to be talking about Data Governance 101, what it is, what value it brings to an organization, and how you can even implement it into your enterprise if that's something that you choose to do. This is going to be a great conversation. We've got a few members here in the audience. I've got Nate helping me out today in the Q&A section. I want to kind of keep this somewhat informal. It's a good conversation. So if you do have any questions, comments, feel free just to send them into the Q&A box. Nate will be moderating that, and we can just have questions and answers and commentary as we go along. So don't be bashful. Well, without further delay, we've got a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. Data Governance 101. What is it that we're going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about what data governance actually is. What is the process of it? Why it's important to an organization? What value does it bring? How do we even go about implementing this if this is something that we want to integrate into our behavior, into our process, into our overall philosophy of an organization? And when we do decide to do that, what do we need to look out for? What are the risks? So all good things to talk about. And to get us started, let's kick it off with what is data governance at a very high level? Well, this is an interesting conversation because it's not just one thing. A lot of times when you look at something that's a problem with technology or with an IT org, a lot of times a solution can be a simple software title where you're buying a software solution, you bring it into your organization and it solves a problem. Yes, there are data governance tools. There are software applications that help manage data governance within your organization, but it's not just a technology solution. It actually is three things, and it requires all three things. It's not only technology, but it's people and it's process, and it's all three of those together. A good data governance, a very mature data estate will occur when all three of these are in harmony and working together to make things more efficient. So when we're talking about what is data governance, we actually have to talk about these three individual sections. So let's start with what is data governance from a people perspective? Well, simply put, to kick it off, you have to have executive sponsorship. Somebody has to basically give the green light to actually integrate data governance into our philosophy as an enterprise. It can't just be somebody with a good idea in IT, because those people typically just don't have enough influence to drive the entire behavioral process of an organization. So it's got to be somebody typically in the C-level suite of a company that says, hey, this is our new operating procedure. This is our new framework of thinking around data management, data ethics, data culture, all of it. And this is the way we're going to operate. So going forward, this is our playbook. That typically comes from the C-suite. That's your executive sponsor. The next person is kind of the public face of the data governance practice within your organization. That's the data governance admin. Might be the CTO, might be the director of data, might be somebody else. But the key part here to know is that this person is in charge of basically communicating within the organization around data governance policies, news, updates, successes, things to watch out for. Basically the one-stop shop for anybody in the organization that might have a question about data governance to go in and get those things facilitated. All of those members create what's called a data governance board council. This is basically the tribal meeting of the organization that meets on a cadence to basically discuss the state of affairs with the enterprise data. So we're talking about data quality issues, certain issues that might pop up for specific units of business within the organization that may have specific data issues. And those are made up of business heads. So maybe the head of sales, maybe the director of sales, director of marketing, IT has a place in the table, obviously. And then we have the data workers, the people who are very intimately familiar with the data stewards. These are the subject matter experts to basically help the organization mold what that practice looks like. The last part is the data consumers. These are your people who ingest reports, process data, work with data, anybody that basically associates with data at any given point of the day. So it's not just a set of few of people. Ideally, it could be the entire organization. Data is everywhere. So when we're talking about process, what we're talking about is getting consensus, talking about transparency, talking about what are the rules of the business? How do we operate with definitions? What is sales over year? Does the sales department have a different definition of sales versus the marketing department? Stuff like that is where we try to get consensus on what our measures are and what definitions are in the business. Don't have a show of hands here, but I'm sure everybody in the audience can relate to a specific time where if you're a data worker, you're looking at a specific report and maybe the business says, hey, this data doesn't really reflect what we expected it to. Maybe it's because the definition of what they were expecting was maybe something different. Maybe sales is calculated by total sales over a quarter, whereas another department may say, well, we're not including refunds as part of sales. So are those numbers expected? Stuff like that. The data governance process is what actually creates a definition for all things data in the organization. And then the transparency aspect of that is able to communicate that to the business. We have a repository of where someone can go to see what a business definition means. What are those rules? We don't have to just walk down and ask the individual that's been with the company for 30 years and hope they're not on vacation to say, hey, what does this mean? I'm sure we've all seen that aspect as well. So consensus and transparency is a big cornerstone of data governance as a process. Another huge cornerstone is access control. It's no mystery. Security is a burgeoning topic day in and day out. We're always seeing security issues. Everybody doesn't want to be on the front page of Wall Street Journal. That's not a good look. So you want to make sure that your security is in check, that it meets with the company standards. But it's not only security. Think about internal access as well. There might not be any malicious intent for somebody in marketing to grab some data and take a look at it. But we need to define what those rules are. Who gets to be in the group that looks at this data? Who gets to be in the group that looks at X data versus Y data? To take it a step further, it's not just the people internally. Perhaps there are customers. Perhaps there are other third parties that we're working with as a business to share data, to integrate data to and fro. That also has specific access layers. We have to be real consistent and real intentional about who we want to have access to the data. The data is the lifeblood of the organization. We've all seen the news story. What happens when the wrong data gets out? It's a security breach and it's never good. Taking even a step further than that, think about bringing in a software solution from a vendor to solve a problem that needs to attach to your SQL server or your application to do some data thing. Well, that's also an access concern. Does this vendor title, does this vendor solution, should they have proper access for these pockets of data within the organization? All required things that need discussion so that we can create rules around that and implement them accordingly. Change management. Change management is another thing that requires discussion. When does it happen? How does it happen? What's it going to impact? So take, for example, if we're doing a software upgrade rollout and it's going to affect the marketing applications, it's going to affect something in sales. Do we have a good process for that? Are we going to have a test run before? Do we have all of the data identified as to which system is going to be targeted with this change process? So that is another key aspect of it. Kind of goes in lockstep with life cycle management. But we're not only talking about software applications, we're talking about systems themselves. If we have a proprietary system that we rely on for data and we need to basically upgrade it or sunset this product and migrate to something else, we need a process for that. Data itself is a life cycle management decision. How long are we keeping this data? Is that a concern? Are we bringing this data on board? Do we have an archival process? Are we required to destroy this data? Is that something that's part of our business and industry, that they require that? All good things to talk about, and that's part of the process. Wrapping up, we've got to have optics into all of this. So this is where auditing comes into place. This is where monitoring comes into place. For example, if you've got a security host set of tools here that shows who has access to what, well, that's a good monitoring solution, because any question that comes up, you have a one place that you can trust to go ask, hey, who is the viewer of all of our sales data? Well, we can easily see that with the right monitoring setup in place. Take it on the other side, something changed in our data. We need to find out what that risk is, how far down that change impact actually goes. Do we have auditing in place? All things to consider going forward. So that's the people, that's the process. Before we get into technology, Nate, is there any questions in the Q&A chat by chance?
So far, we're good to go. Nothing in.
Okay. I know we're throwing a lot of stuff out here, but we got a lot of stuff to go over. So we've talked about people, we've talked about process. Now let's talk about technology. In the world of data, this is a fascinating slide. This wheel that you see on the right, and obviously we're not going to read every one of these bullet points here. It's a lot of information. But what this is this is the DAMA wheel. Now DAMA is an organization that's a data administration management association. They literally wrote the book on data management and best practice. They've got thought leaders that create what that best practice is. Actually, I've got it right here. It's a great read. It's not light reading, but it comes in close to 600 pages of data management best practice. And it goes into each one of these segments. It used to be the case where the person sitting closest to the server was the DBA. There used to be a title called accidental DBA. That's not the case anymore. Data is pervasive throughout all organizations. We need to be intentional about these roles. So people hire specific data roles, and it's not just one DBA anymore. It's not just one application developer that just does reports on the side. We've got entire organizations that have specific tasks that one career can actually fulfill. Data warehousing and business intelligence, that is a career track. Data quality, data architecture, you look at each one of those things, and that's a full-time job in and of itself. And if you look at all those, at the very center of that, data governance is basically what ties all of those units of work into a cohesive, efficient process so that it can be managed accordingly. So let's talk about importance. Why would a business consider data governance important? It's not a brand new term. It's been around for quite a while. But why would it be a business driver for an organization that's considering implementing something of a data governance philosophy or a framework? Well, the biggest business driver is if you have to. Are you in an industry that's tightly regulated? For example, GDPR, the California Consumer Privacy Act, these are all regulations that have very specific rules around data. The medical industry, very much so. They've back in what, 96, I think it was, that they had HIPAA that was regulating how organizations treated your data from a medical perspective so that we can maintain that privacy. Data in the wrong hands, it's, comes with malintent, so we've got to keep it protected. It is an asset. So that would be one of the bigger reasons. If your business has to be regulated in order to even operate, then you're going to need some sort of data governance to be able to manage that process. But that's not the only reason. There are other reasons why you would say, hey, we need data governance because of X. One of the biggest reasons is data quality. I think we kind of keyed on that previously, where if you're looking at a report and somebody expects one value, but the report shows another value, is it dirty data? Is it just a misidentification of a measure? Do we have the wrong definition? There's several different ways the quality of data can be affected. Maybe we're ingesting wrong data. Maybe the data modeling was done quickly and wasn't done intentionally. So we need to take a look at all of our data on a semantic model level, on an integration level, and as a definition level, and make sure that all of our data quality is in good standing order within what the business expects. Risk management, we talked about that a little bit. Definitely don't want your data in the wrong hands. So, we want to be able to identify our risk points in the organization. Maybe it's not security. Maybe it's something where we find out, hey, we found out that we've got some database objects over here, but there's really no source code attached to it. So if that server ever goes down, we don't have a backup of any of the code changes or anything like that. Stuff like that kind of builds in some structure and some just formulaic management over your development systems for data, data quality, like I said. Another business driver would just be that documentation. I think we've all seen situations where somebody had that question of, where does this data come from? Well, we don't know. Can somebody chase down the ETL? Can somebody go look at this data integration and see how we actually originate this data? Um, it's very valuable as an organization to have that on the ready. So if somebody has a question, it can be easily answered. And if that answer is very trusted, then we've basically created better velocity for stuff like that.
Hey, Preston, we have a question that came in. I'll read it off.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
It says, if compliance isn't the reason that an organization implements data governance, then do you think they need to first try to become data-driven but fail because of poor governance?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Wow, that's a good one. Okay, so should they fail? Well, hopefully not. Um, there's two sides of that conversation. You know, if they do fail, um, there's the connotation where it's like, well, we try to do data governance, it's just not for us, so we're just going to shelve that idea. But does that fix any of the problems? I mean, that doesn't say that we're going to fix any data quality problems. We're going to talk about how to implement data quality. But yeah, that's a fantastic question. I would go so far not to lead into any spoilers, but you know, there are some organizations that might not be a good candidate for data governance if you're not trying to be a data-driven organization. But if you are, if you do recognize that data is an asset, and you do try to set up a data governance framework and it fails, why did it fail? Did we try to grow too big too fast? Were we not focused on the right things? We'll get into that a little bit later, but to answer that question, I don't think that that should be the goal, that we should try to create a failing data governance initiative just to kind of create the importance of how difficult it is. But if the goal is becoming a data-driven organization, baby step it in. Find out what exactly is our success path and drive to that. We'll go into that a little bit later. That's a fantastic question. Thanks for asking that. So we kind of just talked about becoming a data-driven organization. We'll talk about a little bit more detail about what that actually is. We've kind of covered enterprise-wide optics, but if you think about it, all of this comes down to trust. If our sales people don't trust our data, we've lost. If our marketing people, advertising can't trust our data, we're not doing a good job. So a data organization has to be trusted in order for it to be truly data driven. So that's the important business driver and takeaway there. So let's talk about value adds. Well, again, becoming a data driven organization, not only as a business driver, companies that understand what that is, they see the value in it. So ultimately, that value comes down to reducing the time from data to decision. If a project spin up takes 6 months and we're doing a lot of data discovery, and a proper data initiative, a data governance initiative would have cut that time down because everything would have already been pre-documented, that's valuable. That means we have a bigger velocity as a business. So that is an extreme value add. Cost reduction is another measure. Once we kind of get everything documented and find out where all of our data assets live, perhaps we want to go through a consolidation measure. Perhaps we want to take it so far as to say, hey, we need to make sure that we're right-sizing our cloud assets appropriately. Are we over-provisioned? That could also be part of a data governance initiative. So managing costs at a more managed level is obviously a better value add as well. We've talked about velocity already, data transparency, data access. You're probably wondering, how does the velocity on data access really matter? Well, take for example, if you've ever been in a situation where, hey, I need access to this data. Well, the DBA said it'll be 2 weeks till it gets around to it. Why? You know, do we not have a process in place? Or maybe it's something that's outside of the realm of just the DBA. Maybe it's something a little bit more organizational. Maybe it's just not data related. But having a very tight and efficient process of creating a very succinct path for data access gets the data in the hands of the right people when they need it, and that's valuable. Consolidation, we kind of talked about that a little bit, but one thing we want to talk about is data silos. A long time, companies, if they didn't have the pathway to access data, they kind of made do. They did what they could. Maybe they spun up their own set of data. Well, now we're going rogue. We're spinning up data that's not managed anymore. Who supports this data? Does the business do it? Do they have the skills and the ability to be able to manage and support what they've spun up? From a DBA aspect, who's doing those backups? You know, that's kind of a nightmare situation if you think about it. So creating a consolidated effort, not only for management and supportability, but to be able to bring that data in as a consolidated semantic model and share it with the rest of the business, that's valuable. We've got an enterprise-wide view of our data. That's extremely valuable. I put a picture of a stack of coins here. Finances are managed heavily in most organizations. Why isn't data? Data is just as valuable to those that recognize it. So that's just one of the things that I'd like to add for value adds. Some of the buzzwords that you'll probably see out in the Twitterverse and online and social media is data culture, being able to spread data awareness within organizations, getting people data literate for certain things. So when people need to update data, they know what that impacts. And then data ethics, having a nice ethical approach to sharing data. So we've hit on data-driven organizations a couple times now in this conversation. For those that might not know or might not have heard what that is, let's kind of take a look at some steps about different states of data maturity organizations could find themselves in. For example, if you're just a smaller company that doesn't necessarily rely on data, maybe 100% of all of your data is very small and vendor provided anyway, you might be data neutral. Doesn't play a huge role in your organization and your day-to-day. Taking the next step up, you're data aware. It's starting to become more prevalent in the system of business and workflow that you kind of needed to do some sort of reporting, but you're not making any huge business decisions based on your data yet. It's just kind of there as a byproduct. Data critical is taking the step further. That's when you do really require your data and you'd like it to be trustworthy. You need clean data. Not necessarily, it might not be driving your business yet, but it is a critical part of it. Data driven is the end state. Full maturity, this is the utopian state of a data driven organization. Think about an organization that can spin up their data and have some AI models attached to it that can do just elaborate forecasting. That really helps shape which direction the business wants to go. But you can't just get there overnight. You have to have some structured steps in place to make sure you've got good data quality, good processes in place before we can get to that utopian state of data drivenness, if you will. So taking it a step further, let's kind of take a look at some of the individual components of what a data-driven organization would look like. Every one of this is kind of like a timeline of data, if you will. We've got governance and security at the very top umbrella, and it basically covers all points from data access all the way down to data science at the far right and all points in between. We've got acquisition all the way through staging that data locally, visualizing that data, putting it into reports, and then running your advanced analytics on it. So there is a life cycle of data. It's not just done happenstance. There's an intentional movement of data throughout the organization. It's all managed. Any questions, concerns, comments before we go forward?
We're good right now in the queue.
Excellent. So we've already talked about why an organization would have data governance as an initiative, a value add, something that they want to consider. Well, let's flip that over. What are the items that would warrant a corporation not to even implement data governance? Well, let's take a look at those as well. What if you don't have to? What if your business isn't tied to any strong regulation? Thinking of maybe a small service company that maybe doesn't do a whole lot of business out in California, perhaps that'd be a good example. Another reason is just the cost of data governance. As you saw in the previous slides, it's not just a one-person operation. It requires a team. It requires buy-in. There's more to it than just, hey, spend half your Friday working on our data governance management initiatives. It just doesn't work like that. That's a huge risk for failure. So if you don't have the ability to implement something like that, if you don't have the team to be able to utilize the steps necessary to put those best practices in place, that would be another driver for why you wouldn't be a good candidate for a data governance philosophy. Another one here is maybe you're not a data company. Maybe you're getting by without the use of a whole lot of data. It's not necessarily an asset. It's there. It might be a byproduct of something, maybe just vendor supplied, but it's not necessarily something that's driving your strategy. Well, that'd be another reason why you wouldn't see a good candidate for data governance. So let's talk about trends for a little bit. Like I said earlier, data governance is not a new term. It's been around for quite a while. But why are we talking about it now? Well, lately, with the adoption of cloud solutions, the robustness of data these days, there's more data produced now than ever. I think every year there's always some fact somewhere. I think Facebook already has one that every year we've got so many petabytes of data that is generated every day. Stuff like the Hadron Collider out there that's what, petabytes of data every hour. It's just data is everywhere, and the ingestion rate of it is so much more than we ever really thought of 10 years, 20 years ago. So that increased volume of data basically tells organizations that, hey, it's coming in fast. What are we doing with it? Is it managed properly? So that would be one trend why you would see data governance coming up in conversation more and more. Another thing is regulations. Regulations are becoming more prominent. 10 years ago, we didn't have to worry about GDPR. It wasn't a thing. We don't remember clicking on those website things that pop up because of that. The California regulation that could go for other states. There could be other states that outside of California that require stronger commitments to data privacy. One of the little byproducts, I'm no expert in the California regulation by any means, but one of the little side notes of that regulation is that if you're a company that might be on the other side of the world or other side of the United States, and you've got a consumer that's in California, if they request that data to be deleted, you kind of have to comply with that. That's part of that regulation. Is that business ready for that? Do they have those processes in place to be able to support that type of request? So that might be a thing that comes down as regulations becoming more, robust and more, superfluous around the country. Another thing, data ethics. It's becoming a consumer requirement. You want to be able to trust your data not only inside of your organization, but as a consumer. For example, like these biometric devices, something like a Fitbit, you want to be able to trust that data. Is that data accurate? Is my heart rate accurate? We're putting a lot of trust in data. So that is why data governance initiatives are becoming more and more popular as we go on. Just throwing up some headlines here. Beginning of the year, there was a lot of articles coming out. Kind of goes hand in hand with AI and ML, since that's a popular topic as well. But to get to really good AI ML, you have to have good data. You can't turn great data science products out of horrible pockets of data. It just doesn't work like that. So kind of goes hand in hand here, but also with data integration, sharing of data with more people. You see kind of the trend line going up. So we've talked about quite a lot about what data governance is, why it's important, how to implement it, or not how to implement it yet, but what value it brings to the organization. But now let's talk about how to actually implement it. So one thing to really nosh on here is to know that it's not a one-size-fits-all strategy. Like I said earlier, it's not just a simple technology product that you can go buy off your shelf, throw it into your organization and say, hey, we are properly data governed. It just doesn't work like that. It's a process, it's people, it's a whole behavior change. So when I say no, not one size fits all, this is the challenge that most companies kind of run into when they start this data governance onboarding process. Maybe they're biting off too much that they're not ready for. For example, a company like a large national bank is going to have a completely different set of data governance requirements than, say, somebody in a smaller sector that just does local business within like a Southeast region or something like that. It depends on the business. So it's very important when you do implement this process, establish those purpose and goals right up front. What is it that we're trying to solve? What is it that we want to be successful for at the end of this year endeavor? So the first year is important for a data governance practice because it sets up all of the framework. We want to make sure that we got the right stakeholders in place. Who is responsible for owning this pocket of data? Who's responsible for owning these business rules? It's very important right up front to claim all those persons as owners so that we've got buy-in across the whole organization and we know who's doing what. So establishing those purposes and goals and then defining what success is. Is it a data quality initiative? Is that our biggest pain point? Okay. So success at the end of our first year is we should have X% of this type of data completely cleaned up. That's a measurable metric that you can drive to. It's a whole lot better than just saying we want all of our issues resolved because we're going to implement data governance. You have to be intentional. You have to be very concise about what it is that you want to attack. So the next thing, yeah.
I got a question that just came in.
Oh, perfect.
It says, many organizations see data as being owned by IT. How do we shift the mindset of business leaders that they own the data and the quality of this data?
That's a great conversation. So it requires buy-in. It requires that ownership. And how do you get to that conversation? Well, if their part of the business is producing that data, and if you can put, I've seen this conversation go where if you can associate certain costs because some organization is not owning their data properly. For example, if you've got like say a sales organization that's just copy and pasting data from spreadsheets into their main data platform, and they're having no regard for data quality. If we can have the conversation of what that downstream cost is for having to clean up that data, get these data points right for the C-level for report time, that's an actual dollar metric that you can show, and it actually affects the business. So IT's budget is limited. You know, we need to be able to be flexible and not necessarily work on other departments' onus of responsibilities. It's not an easy conversation by any means because behavior is hard to change. If you've got an organization, well, we've always done it this way and it's been working fine. Okay, but does this scale? Is this a scalable solution? So that's the importance of when you do set up this data governance board, is to have key members from each pocket of the business have a say, have an ownership stake in it, so that when we say, hey, we're going to put metrics around quality of data, if quality is one of the things that we're talking about, we've noticed that sales has a 30% quality rating in data. Why is that? You know, that's why you really need that stakeholder as well from the C-level to be able to orchestrate the initiative to say, hey, this is our new game plan. We're not doing things like we used to. There's dollar amounts attached to having a finely tuned data governed organization. We're going to get there because it affects the bottom line. Ultimately, it's going to affect bonuses. Money's a huge motivator. So if we can tie those problem and pain points to money, that's probably the easiest conversation to have. And that's easier said than done because it's not an easy conversation. But I think if you can tie it to money, that's typically where you want to have that conversation going from the jump. Great question. Thanks for asking. So once we've decided that we're implementing, we've established our purpose, we've established our goals, we know who our owners of the data are, we've got our stakeholders, we've got our data board council. It's time to do some assessments. The assessment's going to basically take stock of the entire organization. What does our data estate look like? What are our pain points? These assessments are going to be different for every organization. but it's going to illuminate certain things that might not have been known prior. So that is a value add in and of itself. If we did not know that we have data siloed in this organization, and it's also mirrored in this part of the organization because we have to duplicate it for reporting, that's some inefficiency. So tightening up that kind of thing will help the organization flow a bit quicker, more velocity, have a better velocity, and be more efficient. Assessments are key. And it's not a one-time thing too. If we can operationalize assessments to where we've got certain controls that we're monitoring, that way we can kind of keep track on it on a yearly, quarterly cadence, whatever that is. So once we've established the assessment, we've kind of got a lay of the land of what our data estate looks like. Let's go ahead and establish that data governance board, assign that ownership, have that conversation that's hard to have with those owners to say, hey, you are now owning this data. It is now no longer IT's responsibility. We're here to help, we're here to enable, but we are not here to clean up any messes that keep repeatedly happening. The data governance board, once it's assigning the ownership, the process of that is next. Once we develop the process, what we're talking about is who gets the access. We're talking about the life cycle management. This is where that ownership gets a seat at the table. They've got a voice. How does this affect your part of the organization? Is there any waste that's happening? Can we tighten this up? Can we make it more efficient? Does your organization need specific tooling around a certain point to help do your job better? This kind of goes outside data governance a little bit with just overall IT management under software vendors management and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a side relationship there as well. Once we've got those foundational pieces in place, we can really start providing value back to the business. And that value instantly is not instantly, but initially is optics. So if we can get our information from our assessment and be able to have stuff like a data catalog, a data dictionary, things that tell us what data objects are defined as, for example, data types, stuff like that, cataloging where we have metadata catalogs so that we know what this means in terms of a business definition. Kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's a lot easier to look something up in a trusted source that everybody has access to than hunting somebody down in the organization that's been there for 30 years because they just know everything. So having that trusted source, that adds value, but it's a slow process because you have to build all of that stuff. Data quality, that's a huge value add. So if you can get there quickly, great, because that starts providing, it starts yielding results and instant value. We don't have to have dirty reports anymore. We can start trusting our data at a higher level. We've got organizational consensus. Nobody's fighting during the end of quarter reports about whose report is better, whose is off, stuff like that. It's not a conversation. It's no longer a waste of time. We've got one single source of truth, and we're going to operate by it. So that's true velocity. Once we start getting that maturity cycle, we need to start training the organization about data culture, data ethics, what we need to do with data. For example, on a security level, I think a lot of people do this for SOX compliancy and stuff like that. Have to go through training courses. Don't take jump drives, plug them in, just happenstance into your computer. We all know that kind of aspect, but what about on a data level? Can you share this report from somebody outside the organization? Those rules and stuff like that. So it's just basically becoming a data culture advocate. Also, just keep good in mind of data quality. That's also just huge. So that if every seat of the organization has data quality in mind, if data quality is your true pain point, which a lot of organizations it is, people keep an eye out for it. They know what to look for when you have proper training. And then we just iterate that cycle. It's a cadence. It's not a one and done type thing. Data governance is an evolving process. You take it one piece at a time. Define your success, find out what you want to improve, and by what percent. Is it improved year over year? We can measure that kind of stuff. Ultimately, we want to operationalize all of this so we can automate it as much as possible, but you're not going to get there instantly. It's a build-up process. So the ideal state, the data-driven organization, if you will, they have those regular data governance board cadences. Maybe it's a monthly meeting, maybe that's too much, maybe cadence, maybe a quarterly at least, so that we have optics into what the department's needs are in terms of the data. You've got well-defined accepted data ownership. We've already had that tough conversation with IT doesn't own your data. Sales subject matter expert person, you are now the steward and subject matter expert of this data. It's your realm. So we've got everything highly documented. Data quality is mostly operationalized, meaning that we've got monitors in place to be able to try to tip us off if bad data comes in, and it can be immediately dealt with. That's huge. That way it's not subsisting in the ecosphere of data for a long amount of time, and nobody really is tipped off by it. And then we do have that regular training and the communication around data culture. It's important that once you do have a mature data governance, you celebrate your successes. Hey, so-and-so in receiving, they had a data quality improvement score of this quarter, and it enabled this report to never have to, be off by a variance or something like that. Maybe somebody caught some bad data coming in. Maybe somebody found a process to efficiently ingest data better. Celebrate those wins. That creates data culture. So those are ideal states. And on the inverse side, if we look at project risks, the biggest thing that you'll see for a data governance project going off the rails is there's no buy-in. Maybe there's somebody that's on the data team that absolutely is bought in on data governance as a philosophy. They understand the value. They understand the importance of the organization. They're tired of fixing broken data integrations or reports or what have you. But is that person able to influence the entire organization? If you don't have executive buy-in, it's going to be very challenging to get a good, solid data governance initiative off the ground. Maybe these roles are poorly defined. I've seen situations where if a data governance wants to kick off, but nobody wants to really increase the team work effort on the data governance process, they just want to kind of dovetail it into the already current responsibilities. That's kind of bad on a couple of points. Now the people are already tasked with doing extra, and is that work going to be of any quality? It might be something they're just trying to rush through. Have those dedicated roles. Have that dedicated time to say, hey, 10% of your week is going to be working on data definitions. It's going to be working on the dictionary so that we can achieve that higher state of true transparency. Not try to build it into your already existing workload. Another thing that's going to throw it off is not being able to measure what a success is. If you just say, yes, we've got pain points, fix them. That's not really fixing anything. What does fixing them look like? What does success look like? Does success mean that we have a certain metric for our data quality scores? Do we even know what those data quality scores are? So just not really having an end state in mind. That's not necessarily a data governance project. That's any project. I forget who said it. I think it maybe Zig Ziglar said, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. Aim at something. Have a goal. Have an end state. Be intentional. No training and communication. If people aren't in the know about what's going on in the organization around data, how are they able to help? Kind of a simple question. And then not finding that right implementation balance. Like I said, it's not one size fits all. Maybe your organization is going to be successful with like a data governance light, where you're really only focusing on data quality, or you're really only focusing on data ingestion, best practice. There is no defined success path for your organization. You have to define that yourself. So, find out what that path looks like. Let's see, we've already talked about not respecting workflow velocities. But yeah, so a lot of risks here that can really create a nice shaky start to a data governance initiative. Let's talk about tooling. We haven't really dived into that. This is a kind of a whole other hour of conversation if you wanted to have one, but I just wanted to throw this out here. These are some of the tools out in the wild that you'll see that are kind of data governance focused. Microsoft have a new cloud product called Purview. They're putting a lot of resource in. That's going to help with stuff like the data lineage catalogs and stuff like that, to help kind of operationalize your data governance. That's where these tools are really going to shine, because having to do this manually is an instant data governance risk, because it's just too much work. We've talked about how difficult this can be, the people involved, what types of roles are needed, what types of components are needed for good data governance. Leverage these tools, find out which tool works best for you. Some of these are huge enterprise tools, like something like Calibra. You know, it's a completely different tool than something like I think like Elation. Elation's another notable tool in that set. But find the right tool that matches exactly what your success path is, and then go for there. So if you want to know more, a few good books out there currently. I've already talked about the Dama book. That is kind of soup to nuts on data management. They have a great section on data governance and what that looks like. O'Reilly has another good book out that I think it's from a couple of the Google employees that implemented data governance on that level. Great use case stories. About certain wins and how data governance was able to solve certain problems. Really good story in some of those. And then John Ladley has another book that goes into some more detail here. But a lot to cover. I know we've had a lot to discuss here in the last hour. Any questions, comments? I'll Nate, if you can, go ahead and throw my email out there. If your organization is looking to set up something like a data governance practice and you want to kind of explore that more, let us know. Improving's here to help.
Great. I just shared the email. We have no questions currently.
Outstanding. Well, excellent. Everybody, thanks for spending the time with us today. This was a great discussion, and yeah, love your data. Have a good weekend, y'all.